Okay, so it looks like we're live. Welcome everybody to my show, Dive into World Building. Juliet Wade, ha. And Alma, I always have a little attitude when I say that because I'm not used to calling it my show yet. But anyway, somebody said, you should call it your show, and I'm like, oh, okay.
It is. It is what you call it.
Our guest today is Alma Alexander. And she's going to talk to us about some new books that she's got coming out. Are they out yet, Alma, or are they...
The first one was supposed to be out in May, but they had issues with the cover, so it's been pushed back a little bit. Now it's out in the fall.
Now it's out in the fall. Okay, so this will be a sneak peek for those of us who are interested in looking for this book when it comes out in the fall. That's awesome. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it all started out as there was an anthology that came out in the wash, and they wanted stories about weird creatures. So I started writing a story about weird creatures. And about 5,000 words into the story, I realized that I hadn't even said hello yet, and this wasn't a story, this was a novel. And then sort of took off from there. I never did make it into the anthology because I just got tangled up with this thing. But the basic premise here is that I've got a whole world that I've created with the weir as the background, and my educational background is genetics. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to posit a fully functional genetics background on how and why you become a weir.
Okay.
Which is kind of interesting because I never done this kind of thing before. I don't want it to be too technical for a start because obviously, for obvious reasons. But I want it to be real enough to sound like, holy crap, this can happen.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of running a fine line over there, but my basic premise in the beginning was that I had a whole bunch of weirs. They're weird creatures. They're different, like they've got weird corvids, like ravens and what have you. You've got weird cats. You've got weird beagles, for God's sake. You've got all kinds of species, weird lines that go on like this. But my family, my girl, my heroine, she's what's called a random weir. And these guys have the gift or the curse, depending on how you look on it, that they basically turn into the last warm-blooded creature they see just before the turn gets them. So that can, as you can imagine, be problematic.
Yes.
They have a basic form. If they turn properly, they can actually go on and choose things. Before they turn for the first time, they can actually pick a creature and they can stare at that creature and they turn into that, and that's their basic form. If nothing else happens, they turn into that.
Okay.
If they see anything else that's warm-blooded just before they turn, that's what they turn into. And my heroine has a problem because she wasn't supposed to turn at the given time. And the only thing that she saw was her friend, so she turns into a boy. She's a weird boy. So then there's that complication because nobody knows what the hell to do with her. What are we going to do with this creature now? She's kind of turned, but she's turned into another human being.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's that. And then the other thing, the main thread, the main arc of the thing is that she had an older sister. And the crux of the first book is essentially the fact that we know that the sister died. We know that the sister, and she finds out the diary that she left behind, and we learn that nothing that she really knows about it was true because she thought that, well, she thought all kinds of things. It turns out that the sister, there's a particular kind of drug that exists in this universe which can be taken to delay a turn for whatever reason. And the sister in question had been bullied and victimized at school, particularly by one teacher who had it in for the weir, and it was deliberately scheduled stuff so that the weir kids could not get to it because it was scheduled for the 3 days that they were out of it. And she finally had it when he scheduled a visit by one of her favorite authors for the 3 days that she couldn't be there. So she decided to take the drug, and she overdosed.
Okay.
And it's a kind of hanging question. Was it accidental? Was it deliberate? What was going on? And she turns out, she reads the diary. She didn't. the younger sister never realized just how bad things were at this point. And what she finds out is pretty devastating. In the meantime, the brother, or the third kid in the family, the brother, who is really riding the ragged edges because he's about the final age of when a weir turns, and he hasn't turned yet, and he's just going crazy because everyone's laughing and pointing, and he's the guy who hasn't turned yet. And he decides to take matters in his own hands, and he engineers to turn into an actual wolf, into a werewolf, the basic throwback form, the original. Because he learns that the lichens, the wolves, were the ones who had produced, engineered, and discovered this drug. So his mission is to go and infiltrate and find out what's going on and try and bring them down. And at the end of the first book, he basically finds out one very shocking thing. And he comes home, and the last line of I'm giving out spoilers here, but go and get the book. The last line of the book is he collapses the front door of his home after being at the Lycan's place and tells his younger sister, "I found her, she's alive."
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So the second book, which I just finished writing the first draft of, is more or less the story, but from his point of view. So we're doing a little bit of a look at what happened in the first book, but from Mal's point of view, and then we carry it on forward across this thing. So the whole overarching thing is the older sister and what happened to her.
Okay. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about the society in this world? So what I'm understanding is that not everybody is part of this were group.
No, it's a fairly vivid minority in one sense. It's a world where everybody's created equal, but some people are more equal than others.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's a discriminatory thing. The mundanes are ruling, as it were, and these guys are the minority, and they have to have an identity card with a paw print on it to show that they're were. And during the turn, the law of the land is that you either have to have a place which is governmentally sanctioned as a safe turning place, so you can go and lock yourself away for 3 days. And if you can't prove that you have one, then you are obliged to turn up at places called turning houses, which are sort of kind of implied government centers where they kind of dump all the weirs so they can turn there and be out of public eye.
Oh, okay.
So there's all kinds of interesting discriminatory things going on. These guys are the kind of equivalent of the Jewish yellow star thing. You can't go out in public without your paw print ID. So basically, I'm dealing with some fairly interesting, heavy issues here from the real world, because there's the bullying aspect from the first book, where the sister has been literally bullied to death by both students and her teachers.
Yeah.
For being something that she can't help being. And there is the discrimination aspect of this, and it's a question of who's entitled to be in charge of who you are and what you may or may not do. It's
right.
Service can be refused to anybody type of thing.
Okay, and so, well, this is sort of an odd question, but if you're, okay, I'm not here. I'm going to go back and look at my notes for a second. So, okay, so the random wares, is it what they turn into whatever they see each time?
Yeah.
Okay, so she can turn into whatever depending on where she's at and what she's looking at any given time.
It can make for some fortuitous accidents. Her mother happened to be in a farmyard the first time she turned, and now she's a weird chicken.
Okay. So but once you've turned the first time, then you can't switch again?
No, you can. Once you've turned the first time into something, then that is your primary form.
Okay, all right, I understand it now.
If nothing else interferes, then when the turn comes, that's what you're going to turn into. Like if you are a weir mouse, you're going to stay a weir mouse for the rest of the turn cycle. But unless you see something else warm-blooded the instant as you start to turn, in which case the thing switches and you turn into that.
Okay. Okay, that was something I wanted a little bit of more clarity on. But so the random wares are a minority even within the society of
Yes.
the were creatures. Yes. Okay. So can you tell me a little bit more? Because I'm very curious about this. It seems as though you've got this larger society where you've got some people who are, you know, mundanes, as you call them, and then you've got this smaller group that is the were group, and then what I'm understanding is that within that there are also divisions, like the wolves are a particular subgroup of that.
Yeah, the wolves used to be the head honchos. They used to rule the roost, but in the future, in the recent past, they've kind of pulled out. They pulled away. They pulled off into the shadows, and nobody quite knows anything about them really anymore. And that was coldly deliberate because they are the power behind the throne now. They're not obviously doing anything, you know, they're not really ruling openly, but they're doing all kinds of things behind the lines.
So when they were in power, they were the rulers of everything. The mundanes were not in control, or
No,
what?
they were just the top.
So they were at the top within the were population.
Yeah, they were the top of the totem pole there.
Mm.
But they've coldly and deliberately withdrawn to the point that everything about them is now secretive, and you can't find anything about them on the internet because all the proper sites are blocked and all kinds of things. And they're just they're a very secret society at this point.
Okay, so what we're looking at then is a sort of a modern world scenario with our current technology level.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Very much so.
Where is it set?
I don't actually ever say, but by implication, North America.
Okay.
The other thing is, of course, my particular family are literally first-generation immigrants because they ran from a place where the weir were kind of, the classical reaction was burn the witch.
Yeah.
And they ran from that to this place, and the place where they're at is much, in one sense, safer because it is an accepted thing to be what they are.
Mm-hmm.
But it is so nitpicked and regimented and ruled by minute little laws of behavior and what you may or may not do or say or be or go, that I don't know how much of an improvement their migration really was.
Okay.
It's a question of maybe live free or die, but you know, when they came out here, they came to bring their children to be safe, but you know, the question here is, did they? What did they do for those children?
Absolutely. All right, very interesting. Do you what do you know? I'm going to ask you. This may not actually be in your book, but I don't know. It sounds like you've got at least 2 different countries where you're clearly talking about that attitudes are different in these various areas. Did you do a lot of, when you were world building, did you do a lot of trying to figure out what attitudes the different nations of our modern world would have towards the were creatures?
Not specifically, but there is a definite sense that there is a world out there, and the world has got a different attitude to various things.
Okay.
In that one sense, this is the most. I mean, I know this sounds really weird, given the fact that I've just been telling you about a purely fantasy thing, but these are the most real books I've ever written.
Well, I mean, I can totally see that, given that you have a modern world setting. And you're dealing with modern world issues just in a fantastical way. You know, I guess we all metaphorically deal with issues of our current world in some sense. Let me see.
It's one of those world building things where it doesn't look like you have to do a lot of world building because you're already living in the
Right.
scaffolding that you're in, and in that sense, it was both more difficult and easier because of the simple fact that there are a lot of things that are recognizable, and you have to keep them recognizable for the real world to be functional.
Yeah.
And then you have to introduce all these silver threads of complete lies and misconceptions that need to be there for the world to function the way I want it to. It was fun doing the genetics of this, although I was pulling my hair out at certain points because I just had to nail down the random weird thing. How the hell did that work?
Yeah, so tell us about that.
Well, eventually I wound up positing a whole genetic setup on how things happen, and there's a particular thing that gets triggered during the turn. And I've got it written down here. Hang on a second. They've got a block that happens on human DNA, and during the full moon something happens. That block gets taken out, and the weird genome gets expressed rather than the human genome.
Mm.
Which I'm trying to kind of keep it. I can't even read my own writing here. I've got to write this down properly. But I'm trying to keep it as non-technical as I can, while giving the impression that I'm actually giving you true facts of the matter.
Right.
In the current book, the second book, there is a whole subplot about, well, essentially gene therapy.
Oh, okay.
Because when they find the sister who is now alive, but she has lost the ability to turn, and her brother goes out of his way to try and figure out how to fix that, how to genetically fix that, because it was obviously something at that level.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's all kinds of interesting genetics going on.
Interesting approach. Yeah, I don't know. I admit I'm not an expert on urban fantasy or weird stories in general, but I think it's very interesting what you're doing. Jay, what would you do? You have some questions you'd like to ask?
Yeah, I was wondering, do they turn into just animals, or is it like a sort of, like monster werewolf form?
Well, a wolf is an animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think what she's referring to is
They turn into the animal. They turn into the avatar animal. I mean, they'll also turn into anything. I mean, they'll turn into birds. There's a whole corvid clan. There's a whole random. I mean, there's a whole weird raven type of thing. And there are weird owls and stuff like that. So I'm having a lot of fun with this, actually, just coming up with these creatures that are turning up from. But yeah, they turn into animals, into realistic animals, as opposed to the classic walking on two legs, snarling, slavering werewolf type thing. No, that's not.
Okay.
So, and then to follow up on that, are they during the turn? Are they able to think with human thoughts, or are they just giving themselves up for 3 days?
That's an interesting question, and one that gets explored in the books.
Okay.
Because it is an accepted fact that they actually don't. But my girl, when she turns into the boy, actually does have that connection. It's possible to have it. So it's a question of why her, why not them. It's a question of finding out exactly what triggers that. And then in the second book, it's taken a bit further, because one of the characters who turns up here, and who's going to be, in point of fact, the viewpoint character for book number 3, is somebody who was literally created by the Lycans, the werewolf clan, because they had a sort of genetic program going about the selective breeding of weir to try and regenerate the Lycan form.
Oh, interesting.
But what happened was that they would try to mate really, really bizarre pairings and see what happened. And what happened in this instance, and he's arguably unique, is that they created a real shifter in that he's capable of turning into things when he wants to and for however long he wants to, as opposed to being tied to the cycle.
Ah, interesting.
And he knows how to keep that sense of himself.
Okay, interesting.
So that's book number 3. That's one I haven't started writing yet. That's what I'm supposed to be doing for the rest of this year.
Sounds like an interesting place to go, though.
Yeah.
Huh?
You were going to say something, Che?
I was wondering, like, the government, like, turning houses, they would have to be segregated, wouldn't they? Because, like, I'm just thinking, like, the poor little weremouse getting eaten by a wolf.
Oh yeah, they'd have to be segregated, but because there's a whole other level of stuff going on there, and some of them are not as well run as they could be because basically they're staffed. A lot of them are staffed by the people who somehow lost the ability to turn, so they're ex-weir, as it were. It's hard to put this in a nutshell, but the point is that they are all damaged, and their name in the circles is the half-souled, because of the simple fact that they've lost the whole part of themselves. So they, or the higher functioning part of them, a lot of the turning houses are staffed by them or run by them, and you can imagine what chaotic consequences can ensue from that. Houses are supposed to be a nightmare and a bad fairy tale for these guys because of the simple fact that nobody can actually guarantee your actual safety.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You have to go there because that's the law.
So people do just never come back from these because they got eaten by a predator.
It probably happens, yeah.
Oh god, that's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, isn't it? I put my characters through hell, I swear.
But the point is to do it in an interesting way.
Well, I hope I do. But
No,
the thing about these books, the thing about these books is that they've been preoccupying my attention to the extent that few other novels I've written have done. In one sense, it's the underlying reality of it and the important real-life problems that they try to address, like, for example, bullying. I mean, there's lots and lots of stories that you'll see in the media about, I don't know if you remember a couple of, what was it, months, a year back, and that kid was outed as a homosexual by somebody from the college, and he went out and killed himself for it. Well, in this kind of sense, you know, there are things that you may want to keep to yourself. There are things that you may want to. You don't necessarily want the rest of the world to know and victimize you about. I mean, the character who died in the first book had the absolute misfortune to actually turn, because she's a random, of course, remember?
Mm-hmm.
And she had the absolute misfortune to turn in the school, in the corridor, into a cat, in full view of her schoolmates.
Oh, yeah.
And the upshot of that is that she was basically bullied to death over that, because she would go to the bathroom in the school and somebody would put a kitty litter pan under the door.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of thing, obviously not to that kind of extent and to that context, but it happens every day to people.
Mm-hmm.
It happens every day to people who are I don't know, considered to be too fat or too gay or too Jewish or too black or too something to be allowed to survive and lead a normal life.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that to some extent these books might speak to kids in that situation and basically say, you're not alone, and it's something that, although it happens, it can be overcome.
Right, and I am sure that there are things that these were creatures can accomplish that are not like what normal people can accomplish too. But I mean that they probably have a unique perspective and some special understandings of the world that mundanes would not have.
Yeah, but there's all kinds of ramifications, both physical and physiological and psychological, that go with being that kind of different. I mean, you simply have to deal with the fact that for 3 days of every month you are not you.
Mm-hmm.
And in one sense, you are more you than you're ever have been, because that is the most fundamental thing that underpins your entire makeup. And the creature you turn into is the underlay of who you are as a human being, in one sense.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, there's all kinds of layers in this thing, and it's a really complicated and really, dare I say it, ambitious piece of writing.
Well, I like that you're grappling with a lot of these different ideas, because after all, this is what writing is for, I think. It's to explore different kinds of viewpoints and stuff. Tell us a little bit more about the psychology aspect of the story. I'm intrigued by that.
Well, part of the motivations of the second book and the viewpoint that I'm exploring here is that the drug that you can get to delay the thing or to deal with this, it's kind of sort of available, but obviously not generally so to young people like that. So what I have is a situation where her brother, who's maybe 12 at the time, who is responding to bullying situations in a lot different ways than she is. In other words, he's picking fights and he's breaking bones. And he's much more of a street tough than she is. And he can figure out how to get these things, and without really knowing what he's doing, he's the one that gives his sister the drugs. And that is basically something that rips him apart for the rest of his life, because of the whole, can you imagine the metric ton of guilt that would descend on a 12-year-old's head. I did this, I killed her.
Yeah.
So he's everything he does from then on is it's an attempt to get past that and to get through that and to make up for the fact that he did something unspeakable without knowing why.
Right.
So, like I said, this is not these are probably not light reads, but they're going to make you think.
Yeah, sounds really cool.
Are they being published as young adult?
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one because it's a very dark young adult. But then again, I am always been of the opinion that, you know, you're never too old for a good young adult book. So
that's true.
I read a lot of young adult and enjoyed it a great deal.
Well, there was something that I read just recently by John Green, who obviously writes young adult, and he was saying something fairly interesting when he said that when he started getting mail about The Fault in Our Stars, a lot of it was from nominal adults who'd read that thing and got something out of that, as opposed to your 15-year-olds who may read it, enjoy it for the story, but not necessarily get everything that went into it. I think that a good young adult book, when reread, is a kind of peeling back a layer. I love that bird.
He's a lovebird.
Or is it her sister? I'm just kidding.
That'd be great. It'd be cool to turn into a bird. See, I'm like were-parrots, man. And also be like still really smart. I mean, like those African greys, some of them are ridiculously smart.
Yeah.
There was one that we met when I was living in Africa. A friend of ours was parrot-sitting an African grey, but it belonged to a friend of his who'd gone away for a couple of months, so he had the parrot while the guy was away. And at one point we were there for dinner, and my father and this guy got into a little bit of a heated political argument, as you do. And yada 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 yada. And during one of those pauses in conversation, the parrot in its cage in the back kind of pipes up. So what? It was just so perfect.
So I'm going to ask you another question about your book. Do you do a lot with the animal forms of the characters and that portion of their experience?
Some, but the third book is going to address a question that's probably hasn't been dealt with in a lot of detail before, and that is, if you are a human being who is a certain size, shape, and weight, and you turn into something like, oh, I don't know, a cat or a mouse or a lovebird or a grizzly bear, what happens with respect to the weight ratio, the mass ratio? How can a 180-pound creature turn into a 300-pound creature or a 10-pound creature? Where does everything go?
Yeah.
And my solution to that is that you pay for it with energy.
Oh.
Mm.
You are basically constrained by, if you're turning into, say, a bear, you're going to be the slowest bloody bear on the planet because you paid for it with so much energy.
Oh.
That you literally are a slug bear. And if you turn into something like really small, like a vole or a weasel or something like that, that's a fraction of your body weight, your metabolism is so high that you're basically a weasel on speed.
Oh, I think if you turn into a shrew, you would probably die of starvation before you could, like, last one night. Like, you would just instantly...
That's exactly it. The smaller a creature you turn into, the more probably danger you're in. Not because somebody might eat you, but because you're gonna starve to death without being able to feed the metabolism that you now have.
Yeah.
Think about a hummingbird. Think about the way that a hummingbird actually literally has to keep moving because it just has to deal with that.
Yeah, I watched a documentary on hummingbirds. It was insane.
Yeah.
They actually don't sleep. They go into torpor overnight in order to survive, I guess, sort of. It was really interesting.
They don't sleep. That is interesting.
Yeah, it's more like it's hibernation. It's nightly hibernation, torpor.
Huh.
Yeah.
So hibernation, where your body functions slow way down and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Heart rate, body temp, everything just sinks. Like, I think
And
that's
just
how
as
you
well
feel.
that these things last for only 3 days, because I don't think that anybody can deal with that long term. And of course, the upshot of this is that the weir creatures are notoriously short-lived. They have very short lives. And part of that is simply because of the fact that, can you imagine the strain on one's heart?
Hmm.
I think, like, would anybody, like, with careful research find, like, an animal that's equivalent in body weight and, like, actually sort of shoot for that? Like, if you could manage, like, if you could turn into, like, a chimp or something.
Yeah, if you were a full random weir, you could probably choose that as your primary form and you'd be fine. But if you are one of the genetically carried lines, you just turn into a raven and that's it. You don't have a choice in the matter.
Fuck. Okay, sucks for them. Got it.
So weird creatures are short-lived. What does short-lived mean in this scenario? Like, that means presumably they have lines, so they are having families, right?
Yes. So they basically have their families fairly young. And there's also the fact that there are complications in terms of pregnancies because a lot of them don't really carry to term. Think about that. Pregnant weir.
Yeah.
It can be fairly interesting in terms of trying to figure out the physiology. And at certain point in a pregnancy, when it's just about established, a pregnant weirwoman stops turning completely until she has the baby.
Right.
Because there's no way that you can carry a pregnancy to term by suddenly turning into a mouse. What are you going to do? But the thing is that there's a lot of difficulty with that. So they have families, but they have small families. And as far as short lives are concerned, a 60-year-old weir is really old.
Okay. So short lives, but not super, super short.
Yeah, they mostly die of relative old age after 50.
Okay.
And that's part of the research that the wolves are doing as to why the humans are living normal lives and lifespans, and the weir are so truncated. But it's the way that I posit is a lot of it has to do with the inevitable internal upheavals that a turn will do.
Yeah.
It's going to play ruddy havoc with your innards.
That's interesting. So, okay, so let me ask you, I mean, I have one more question. How much do you do with the gender swap issue? Are there gender issues that come into
According to my husband, not nearly enough, but he wanted it to be far more, how do I dare I say it, titillating than it is. But the point is that there is a certain shock of a teenage girl suddenly being a teenage boy.
Yeah.
And I do a little bit of that in the first book when she turns into the boy and she goes in to take a shower and she suddenly realizes, hey, whoa, this body is not exactly the thing that that I bargained for here. And then there's, of course, the simple fact of the matter that she is a girl, so she has girl clothes. And as a boy, she goes into her underwear drawer and is suddenly going, I can't wear this. And then has to go and buy himself something to wear, and that's even more acutely embarrassing because now what do you do? I mean, you're supposed to try on something, and you've got this embarrassing bits everywhere. And but yeah.
There's a manga, a Japanese comic book called Ranma One Half, and the main character, Ranma, is a boy who falls into an enchanted pool in China, and so every time he gets wet, turns into a girl.
Oh, okay.
And some of the funniest bits are like he'll just rip his shirt open, like completely not caring that he has breasts because he's used to being a guy his whole life. So being topless is like nothing to him.
That could be, yeah. Similar sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a good manga. It's older, but
yeah, it's sort of what they'd call a classic probably at this point.
Yeah, at this point, yeah. Unfortunately, my God, it was practically new when I was coming up, but yeah, it's back from like the 80s and the 90s, and they all the people who each enchanted pool turns you into something different with like hot or cold water. So almost all the characters turn into something, and so it's very much just a comic of physical comedy.
It sounds like a place to steer clear of.
Yeah, I know, and yet people keep going and training there. There's an enormous cast of characters who all turn into crazy animals. It's like, yeah, stop going there.
I'll ask you one more thing. This makes me think of rites of passage, you know. Well, you know, you can't be a true X, Y, or Z until you've trained at this place, and chances are you're going to end up having a transformative property after you're done. But do you do a lot with, sorry, I was going to say, when do people start changing? In their teens? Or
15.
Okay.
So, in other words, more or less with the puberty kicks in. So there's the complication of the hormonal aspect as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I imagine like some people turn early or late.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think she said the brother turns late.
Very late, and he's basically he's basically losing it. you know, he knows that he's a marked person. Everybody knows that he hasn't turned, and he should have done 2 years ago. And his peer group have already turned, and everybody's a full-fledged we're coming of age thing, except he has. And the way that they do this, as you say, you can pick what you want to do, what you want to be. So when he was about to turn for the first time, you can actually rent an animal.
I love you can rent one.
And basically what happens is that he got locked into the turning room with the animal. And it's like he was there with the animal, so if he turned, he had the animal, so he would turn into the animal that he wanted to be. Well, he started out wanting to be a Wolverine. But as it happens, hiring or renting a Wolverine tends to get expensive. So when he didn't turn, he had to scale down. So eventually he ended up with a weasel.
Oh!
And he was sitting there with this weasel for turn after turn after turn, and he was getting sick of the weasel. And when he turned into the wolf, he basically ate the weasel.
Ew.
So yeah, I have been having a bit of fun with this thing. Despite the seriousness of it all.
Fun because the whole thing about renting.
I know. Oh my God.
I like how you've gone into the some of the practical implications of a scenario like this. A little tiny things like animal rental or.
Yeah.
I wanted it to be as real as I could make it.
Yeah. That makes sense. Very cool. Che, other questions?
No, nothing I can think of.
It's available for pre-order, by the way, number 1.
Oh, okay. Thank you for telling us.
What's the title?
Random.
Ah, okay.
If you'll give me a second, I'll give you the URL.
Sure, I'll put it up in my report. You can put it in the chat bar.
Yeah.
Where is it? Oh, there we go. I can put it where?
In the chat bar. So if you move your mouse over to the left side of your window, you'll a little menu will pop up, and at the very top there's a blue icon like little word bubbles, and that will give you the chat. There you go. Perfect.
So is that cover not like the final cover?
Not yet, no. They had a cover artist who was supposed to be working on that, but he kind of didn't provide one in time, so they couldn't go for the original timetable. So now they've got a different cover artist. There's actually a funny story there. The guy who they picked as a cover artist is one letter different from the guy who did the Where's Waldo things.
Oh, gosh.
So when she gave me the name of the artist, and I accidentally put that extra D in there, and I got the Where's Waldo artist, and I'm going, they're doing this with a Where's Waldo artist? Like, who the hell? What?
Oh my
And then I had to go back and double check the name, and sure enough, that middle D is not there. But okay, there was a definite piece of cognitive dissonance here.
Are you sure it wasn't Where's Waldo without the H?
Good one.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think that we can probably call this good just a few minutes early.
Okay.
So much, Alma, for coming and telling us about your ideas. They're really fun, and I hope everybody will get interested and go out and buy your book. So. And also thanks again for popping into the Hangout last night with me to get all the technical issues worked out before we had to
Just
try
as
it
well
live.
because I never realized I had to download an extra app for this, which could have been interesting this morning. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, we're going to sign off, but we will obviously be able to continue our discussion off the air. So,
All right.
thanks everybody who's watching. Bye-bye.